All right, we are live at the Eisenhower Library and Museum here on KCMO 95.7 FM. Made the trek out last night to Abilene and starting to fill up here. We now welcome on and say hello to Kansas U.S. Senator Roger Marshall joining us here. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Hey, Pete. Good morning and welcome to Abilene, Kansas. Welcome to one of my favorite places in the world. This library museum means so much to me. I was just thinking this morning, I stopped at the chapel here, which I always do. My dad was in President Eisenhower's funeral procession. It
was right?
April morning, 1969. Every city in Kansas sent a police officer to be in the funeral procession. My dad was chosen. We had a trained German Shepherd police dog, and my dad got on his best uniform. I just remember in the morning, it was like it was yesterday. I put on my Sunday clothes, thinking that I was going with him.
Okay.
And he broke the news, no, you have to go to school today.
Oh.
So on my 10th birthday, which was in August that year, he said, well, what do you want to do for your birthday? And I said, well, the family needs to go to Abilene and pay their respects to the president. So since that time, I wouldn't say infatuated, but certainly I've tried to understand who President Eisenhower was. And here it is, D-Day, 80 years after D-Day. I'm so honored that you would come and help celebrate. It means so much to all these veterans here, the active duty soldiers. Thanks for covering this.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and this idea came from Merrill Eisenhower about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I said, let's make it happen, and here we are. So what about you, coming from, of course, this part of the state, having a full private practice life as a doctor, and now being in the U.S. Senate, and trying to keep that legacy of Ike alive. What is that like for you as a lifelong Kansan?
Exactly, Pete. So every chance I get an opportunity to talk about Ike, I try to do that. I was honored to go to D-Day on the 75th anniversary 5 years ago, representing the congressional district of Eisenhower as well, to be there. And here, the 80th, here I am back here. Just spoke to a group of soldiers out front that are here for the ceremony and just telling them the history and the legacy of who President Eisenhower was, 34th president of the United States. When he finished his presidency, most of the historians said, oh, he's the 31st best president ever. But today, most consider him the top five. To think about what he did, but it took decades to come to fruition. He, of course, gets credit for the interstate highway system, but he did so much more than that. He started NASA. He started the Department of Education. He did the first civil rights legislation. I know that Johnson gets credit for that. President Eisenhower did civil rights legislation years before Johnson did. He stood up to the governor of Alabama after the Topeka versus the Board of Education trial, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education. Lastly, he put the cornerstone for the Pentagon and the CIA building. So he had a priority for funding for those two entities as well.
That's fascinating when you talk about a legacy of a president changing over, 50, 60, 70 years, and you kind of look back on it, and it's like, you know what? Guy did a lot. Legacy is actually incredibly positive. History, it sounds like, has treated President Eisenhower well. Is that fair?
Absolutely. So in so many ways, of course, he was a five-star Supreme Allied Commander and President of the United States, arguably during the best economic boom of our lifetime. Now, don't tell the 45th president that his wasn't the best ever. It was the best in my professional lifetime, but I think most people say President Eisenhower had the best economy. United States was coming of age. It was like this adolescent that was budding its wings, right? So the economy was surging. The baby boomers were at home having babies then, and just this incredible greatest generation running the country. And Ike was kind of the father, the grandfather to those soldiers here. And even today, you'll see people that served with him. There's a nice statue of him out here in the middle of the garden. They'll stop and salute the old man, as they say. So yeah, quite a legacy, and it's great to be here.
So you've been coming out here obviously since you were a kid. What is it like now being here on the 80th anniversary of D-Day? We do have some World War II veterans who are kind of making their way in. We'll be having them on the show here coming up. To kind of be doing this and coming here since you were a kid, and now you're sitting here representing them in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, I just think about the freedoms that we were given, and my son is just got promoted from a private to a sergeant
congratulations.
This week. He's over in Poland serving this country. I served in the Army. My brother, my dad served. Someone from every generation of our family has served the military since the Civil War. Actually had four grandfathers of my grandfathers served for the Union Army. Three of them died in battle. Defending Old Glory. So it's great to be here honoring the current soldiers as well, and especially those veterans who fought for our freedom.
What does it mean when you look at what we have going on today, where we're at today, back to Ike's legacy, and how we can apply his leadership skills, his political talents, and what he did for this country to today and where we're at in America right now?
Yeah, so Pete, when I think of Eisenhower, I think of a humble leader. And just visiting the chapel, like I said, every time I come here, I try to take a few moments to reflect. And one of the three excerpts from speeches he has is he speaks about one of the reasons I stayed so humble is because people died that made me famous. People died. There was the blood of his soldiers and the sweat and tears of his fellow soldiers that made him famous. So he got all the glory, but he knew that people died that ended up making him famous. And he also always stresses that, and I thought about this as we did the World War I reenactment memorial in D.C. for the 1st Infantry Division soldiers, is those soldiers go into battle, there's nothing in it for them. It's not like they're going to all come home and be famous because of what they did in World War I, World War II, whatever it is. But just the humbleness of Eisenhower, and that's my prayer every morning, honest to goodness, Pete. So my prayer every morning is that I would do justice, that I would love mercy, and walk humbly. And the walk humbly part is, I think, the part that's missing in D.C. Senators are treated with too much pomp and circumstance. And, of course, that's a scripture from the Old Testament, the book of Micah. I didn't make that up. But the walking humbling part is what I think of Eisenhower.
Roger Marshall's here on KCMO. This location, as a U.S. Senator, someone who's from this part of the state, what does this location in Abilene mean to the state from a tourism perspective, from a pride perspective, for many folks in Kansas City who probably just for whatever reason haven't been out here yet? What does it mean to this part of the state?
Yeah, so Pete, I've been to most every presidential library in the country. Long before I became a senator, I was just fascinated. And my wife calls it my Dead President's Tour. But that being said, there's not a nicer presidential library museum in the entire country than this one. People are missing out. It is the #1 tourist attraction in Kansas. Cabela's is right there with it, but some of the newness of Cabela's is worn off. But it's the #1 tourist attraction in Kansas, and it just happens to be on the interstate highway system. I don't know how that came to be, but absolutely that's part of it. It's an incredible town in so many ways. It's great just to walk through town. They got these old mansions that are still here. Downtown has quite a, we used to call them a flea market type of situation, but the museum library here, it's a must for everyone to stop and see.
It is. It's right off the interstate. You can't miss it. What do you have planned for today? You're obviously here. You're going to be part of the ceremonies. What do you have going on here for today and the weekend?
I think most importantly is just greeting the veterans and telling them thank you, that I care, that we care as a nation. The active duty soldiers, sharing with them some of the history of Eisenhower that I know. And really the highlight of my day, though, was the time I had in the chapel this morning already. There was nobody else in there. Just to reflect, what that I can see that baton of Eisenhower handing it to Bob Dole, handing it to Pat Roberts, and then handing it to Jerry Moran and me. That baton of Kansans fighting for this nation, modern day patriots. And though sometimes it doesn't look like that on the news, that really being from Kansas, we are the glue up there, trying to bring these coastal states into one discussion, trying to figure out what's best for this nation.
Is that Kansas pride on display when you walk into that Capitol building for work every day? Do you try to put it on display?
I don't think it comes natural. It really shocked me is even when I got to Congress, one of the first things I did is I sat down with a big group of freshman Congress members to talk about immigration and border security. 30-some of us.
Yeah.
And certainly I invited them, and I asked everyone on this round table, why is immigration important to you in your hometown, wherever you're from? And everyone had a different answer. And at the end of that, they all looked at me and said, you're from Kansas, put these pieces together.
Wow.
And then from that, we started this legislation to secure the border and fix immigration. A bill that each side got, President Trump got 90% of what he wanted for the wall. We got 90% of the immigration, but it failed by 4 or 5 votes, and the rest is history.
Wow.
But we tried.
Roger Marshall, Kansas U.S. Senator. He is here in Abilene, where, of course, we are at for the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum 80th anniversary of D-Day on KCMO. Senator, thank you as always for the time. It's great to see you in this setting, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks again for being here. We're honored to have you.
You bet. Roger Marshall on KCMO Talk Radio.